Okay, let's go for it. Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see you. I'm so excited to be here with you. I'm going to run through English, home language, and first additional, and I'm going to show you how to answer some of the questions and also what to study. Don't know about you, but sometimes it feels like we can't study for English, right? And yet you should. Very hard, continuously, all your life, so that you can use the language adequately. Right, let's jump into it. So I'd like you to make a list. We're going to go to slide number 1 here. And I'd like you to make a list. It's in your booklet, so highlight as you go. If there's a topic that you are unsure about, ensure that you get to know it, go through your notes. If you don't have notes, Junior Tech website does have that, so please just go through there. Now, when we study for paper 1, I've divided it up into different sections here for you, because each section has a particular thing that you need to study. We're going to start with Question 1, Section A, which is what? Your comprehension section. So have a look there with me. The most important thing is, ladies and gents, we use current articles when setting the papers. So please read a newspaper. At least the last 3 months of newspapers, go through the main articles as well as Huffington Post. Little hint from me to you, the person that sets paper 1 loves using the articles from there that is applicable to you as young people. Right, so anything to do with matric, surviving studies, look at those topics and just read. It's very important that you read even when going into your studies next year. Now, we do use poetic devices, figures of speech, and all of the figurative language when setting the paper for question 1. So if you do not know what your figures of speeches are, if you do not know what your poetic devices are, or sound devices, hint, 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 please go through them. Then you need to revise those notes in your notebook. If you don't have them, please have a look at our website. We have a few there for you. Now, the new thing that came in with this paper this year, and this is both for home language and first additional, is that we ask language questions, and make a special note of this on your notes. We use language questions in every section of the paper except the summary. That means that it's not just a comprehension anymore. I'm going to ask language questions in question 1, in question 3, 4, and then of course question 5, which is your language section. Right, so you need to know your language. It is now 40% of the paper and not just a measly 5% anymore. Okay, so language rules, most of them I've put up here for you as well, and we'll go through them as they pop up. But what I love asking in paper 1 in this section is your idiomatic expressions, and that is part of what we call general knowledge. You need to know what sarcasm is, what your irony is for this paper, please, and that forms part of your figures of speech that you need to know. Malapropism and tautology, make a special note of that. We will be asking malapropism, we will be asking tautology. Anyone know what that is? Good, all right. Tautology is when we say the same thing twice and it's an error, like, could you please reverse backwards? Or draw a round circle. It's a bit redundant, don't you agree? So we leave one of them out, and your job is going to be to figure out what is redundant or extra, and we are going to fix that, and you're going to write that answer, the fixed answer, on your paper. Right, I know that it's a lot of theory and a lot of things we're going to talk about here, but please in between ask questions, because sometimes there's something that comes up that you're unsure about, you need to ask. Right, so as we progress through our lesson. Let me just stand here, otherwise this mic is making a funny sound. Right, the other thing we're going to do here is talk about tone and mood. What is the difference between tone and mood? Tone is the way that the writer feels. Mood is the way that the reader is supposed to feel when reading the piece. Yes, they're the same words. We use words that have emotions in them. But you need to understand that sometimes the speaker or the narrator of the piece will use specific words. Now write there a side note for yourself at tone and mood. Look at the diction, in other words, the choice of words that we use. When you look at the words that we've used, you need to figure out, is it positive or is it negative? And then tell me how the person feels. Ladies and gents, you cannot tell me that the mood is positive or the tone is positive or negative. If you write that, you will not be afforded the mark there. You must give it a word, like the speaker feels positive towards women, and he is encouraging. Right, or you can say something like, the speaker or the writer feels despondent towards this topic. And then identify what has been spoken about, what the main aim is here. Got it? So you need to have a list of words that express emotions. How do I feel? So ask yourself that with this tone and mood. Right, so that is what you study for the comprehension section. I'm going to go to the next part. Let's have a look. Section B and C. Section B is where I'd like you to start with this paper. It is your summary. You can score 10 out of 10 for your summary. I'm going to quickly run through what we do to get that. Firstly, it has to be the main part of the sentence or the idea. Do not double up ideas and write in full sentences. That is how you score your 10 out of 10. Right, so for summary you can't really study, you can only practice. Once again, read a piece, try and summarize it into your own words. Now a little hint from me to you, how do we summarize in our own words? If you have less than 4 words, consecutive words, you can write it as is from the text. So in different words, you can quote a line or a sentence directly from the reading piece. If you change one word, you have written it in your own words. Got it? So that is how we also win here. Obviously, when a concept or a word can't be changed, you keep it the same. Got it? But aim for no more than 3 words in a row, because 4 words constitute quoting directly from the text, and that you will lose your language marks. The aim is to get 3 out of 3 for your language, and 7. It's a guessing game whether you're not going to get it or not, but another hint I'm going to give you is there might be a single concept in each paragraph. If there are 7 paragraphs, there you go, there are your 7 points. Right, so take note, the summary is where you start. Then you go back to comprehension. Right, it really, really helps, especially because it's supposed to boost your confidence so that you can tackle the difficult comprehension section. Right, now, section C, it has 3 questions, so make a list for yourself. We have the cartoon. Come on, let's write this down. The cartoon, the advertisement, and the language section. My advice would be to do the summary, then the comprehension, then question 5. Question 5 is an easy 10 marks. This is something that we use the seat in bum method. You know what that is? You sit on your bum and you study the rules. It's as simple as that. You need to go through your language structures, and I'll give you a list of what you need to do there. You need to go through all the language structures, everything from how a sentence is made up through to parts of speech. We will always ask, make a special note, the apostrophe punctuation rule, always, in every single paper. Okay? The other one that I see that they've asked the last 3 years is the hyphen. What is the function and the difference between a hyphen and a dash? You need to understand and know that. Right, so take a special note of those 2. Now on top of that, when we get to our cartoons, here's what you study. You need to know the difference between facial expressions, everything from the top of your head to your shoulders. You must be able to put it in words. So for example, the eyebrows are raised, the eyes are big, the mouth is large. Whatever you see, write it down. Think emojis, right? If you can express what an emoji is, you can tell me what a facial expression is. Then body language, look carefully. From the top of my head to my toes. Everything that I'm doing with my body. If my hands are akimbo like so, you need to tell me that. Right, it expresses something. Even worse if I'm doing this, and on top of that leaning forward. It tells you what I'm feeling, yes? It's not a very good one. Steer clear of that one when a teacher does that to you, right? Remember that everything works together. Right there at your cartoons, that we have body language plus words. The combination of that creates the humor. What creates humor, by the way? Does anyone know? Yes? Irony, definitely. Anything else? Sarcasm. And we love, write this down, we will be using satire if it's a political cartoon. Now, it's very important that you are able to identify humor because that's the whole point of a cartoon, yes? So ensure that you know those three things and you know how to identify them. The other one that we love using is a pun or ambiguity, anything to do with wordplay. So once again, do you see that figures of speech and poetic devices are important for this paper? It's not just restricted to paper 2. Right, so you need to study them, you need to know the definitions, but more importantly for English, it's about the application of the knowledge you have now. Hopefully you've done this now for 12 years, hopefully you can be able to apply the knowledge. But first start with the basics, study the information. Right, then we get to the advertisement. The basic thing here is the jargon, the words that we use. Do you know what a slogan and a logo is? Do you know how we use them? Have you looked at the image versus the words? Ensure that you know how to identify all of these things. And we're going to run through a few examples of what we can ask. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, we only have about 3 or 4 questions per section here. Right? That doesn't sound like a lot, does it? It means that you're going to have 3 or 4 mark questions. By the way, remember your language question is going to be included here. Okay, so you will have a language question like, what is the function of the exclamation mark? Right, so remember, language question here. But we'll go through that just now. Last part. I've given you a list, study all of them. You have 10 questions there, but we can divide it up into either 5 questions, or we can give you a full set of 10 questions for the language part. Ensure that you know each and every element here that I've listed here. I'm not going to run through it. I'm sure all of you can read, otherwise you won't be here with me today. Please go through it. Please ensure that if you're unsure, that you ask. And also, you can email me, please. Let's go to the next one. Now, what is important to remember for this paper? Now, what I find, young ladies and gents, is you get the paper, and for the 10 minutes reading time that you have, what do? You go through the questions, yes? Please don't do that. It is the worst thing, because what you do is you create this trepidation, this fear that, oh man, I can't find this answer. What I'd like you to do is the following. You do not look at the questions until your time starts. Right? Try something new just at the end here. You have to read through the comprehension pieces. You have to read through question 1, question 2's reading pieces. Look at the advert, look at the cartoon, do not touch the language section. Why? You need to, as the paper says, comprehend. Understand what are you dealing with. And I promise you, if you've read through them at least twice in that 10 minutes, you will be much happier answering section 1, for example. Right, so please do me that favor, make a little star there for yourself. Remember to do this. I only read the comprehension pieces in the first part there. Very important is the instructions. We find, and this information also comes from the roadshow that we have each year for English, where we identify what learners have done wrong in previous papers. That is also why I've given you the papers from last year, because this is the information that came from them. We find that learners do not follow instructions. It is very important in English that you are able to read the whole thing, including the instruction. If you miss one word, and we're going to get to that when we get to paper 3, it can cost you a lot of marks. You have to follow instructions. The summary is a prime example of that. If you do not write in paragraph form, first additional you will write in bullet form, but for home language you have to write in paragraph form. Otherwise you lose marks, right? And we're going to look at that. The other thing that is fun is that you get to take a highlighter into your exam. If you haven't done so, please start doing that. Highlight, it's a working document. You need to highlight the question words for yourself to ensure that you answer properly. The other thing I want you to do, and you can maybe write this into your notes, highlight the mark allocation. Why? Because it guides you. What we find is now we've asked you a question, seems easy, but it counts 4 marks. Then we get 1 sentence. How many marks are you going to get for that? Maybe 1, if you're lucky. So please ensure that you highlight to guide yourself in this paper. And the other thing that I really want to encourage you to do is, we see that when you are nervous in your papers or tired, you skip questions or you forget about questions. Take your pen, tick off when you've completed a question. And more specifically with your summary, when you have gone through the instructions, make a tick. Like, yay, I've done that. Also a little bit of a boost of confidence that I'm getting through the paper. Right, if you're getting tired or bored, highlight, write extra notes. Okay. And the rest you can read yourself. Okay, let's jump into the question part. I want you to highlight the question words as we work through them so that you pay attention and you don't get lost here. We're going to work with our question 1. I'm going to show you what you struggle with, what you should do, and we'll go from there. Very important, highlight in the marker location. As I've mentioned just now, it is very important that if I give you a 3-mark question, I'm looking for 1 or 2 statements plus proof. Right? Highlight those in your document, please, so that you can pay attention to them. When we talk about diction, tone, and style, you need to know the jargon, you need to know what it means. Remember that diction is my choice of words. It can either be formal, informal, register, write that in please. Formal or informal, register, and then you need to tell me why has this been used. Informal register will be used to give access to a wide audience, make it more universal, make it understandable, make it easy to read. When there's more formal information or more factual information, then it changes the function of what I'm trying to do here. When I've used humor, it's to entertain instead of inform. Write that in for yourself as part of your answer that you can write there. We are going to ask you, why has this style been used? Why has this choice of diction been used? And you need to know why we've done that. And a simple way to do that is just to look at the text. Right. Highlight the verbs. So point number 3 there, the verbs. Each question uses specific verbs. Now, if you page to the back of your document, quickly page to the back of your document, last 2-3 pages, you will notice I've given you a list of all the possible questions that we could ask you. Some of them even overlap with your other subjects. It is very important that you go through them and understand, what am I asking you to do? If I'm asking to define, it's different to explain, yes? You need to know how to answer that. So please use that as your guide, as your Bible for when studying for this paper, even for paper 2, because we use specific words because we want a specific reaction. Are you also with me? Right, we're going to go to the next part here. It is very important that you look at how we phrased the question. Now go to question paper 1 for me, please. Open at question 1, comprehension. I know it's home language, but it does apply to our first edition as well. You can expect the same thing, just slightly less technical. If you look at the first questions there, what we normally do, there are 2 things. Number 1, we ask the questions according to how they appear in the paper. So if you are unsure where to go find it, look at the sequence in which we have placed it. We'll say, refer to paragraph 1. Please don't go look for it in paragraph 5. I know it sounds silly me saying this, but this is what happens. You're unsure, so you go look for it everywhere. If you look at the paper, you'll notice it says, refer to paragraph 1. Look at line this. Make a note for yourself. Do not look anywhere else except where I've told you to look. Because we lose marks because we reference the entire text. Alternatively, what do? We use our own common sense. Write for yourself a really big note. Do not use my common sense. If you know the sky is pink, but I've told you in the article that it's blue. If I said in the article that it's pink, guess what you're going to write? The sky is pink. Are you with me? You do not use your own common sense. There's one question, and it's the last question, the comparative question, where you're going to use your common sense to answer that. The rest is straightforward from the text. 80% of question 1 or section A is straightforward from the text. Got it? So all of you should at least get 80% for that section. Yes? Right. Now, the other thing that we really struggle with and why you lose marks is, you'll see the third point here on the PowerPoint, is lifting. Lifting means that I take the information as it is written in the comprehension piece, and what do? I copy and paste it into my answer. It's not completely wrong, but the problem is I'm asking you to use your own words as far as possible. So write a big fat note. Do not quote directly. You have to use your own words. You have to summarize the information and your answer in your own words. If you are just going to copy and paste, you're going to lose marks. First additional, this is specifically for you. I know that in some of our other first additional languages, this is what happens. You copy and paste directly from the text. It does not work in English, right? And that is why we lose a lot of marks. Where you could have gotten 3 out of 3, now you're getting 1 or 2. Have any of you found that in your comprehensions or in your language papers? You often get the 1 and the 2, but never the 3. And this is why, because you're lifting unnecessarily. Now let's talk about the last question. If you turn to the last question in your paper, or the second last question in your paper, you'll notice there's a 4-mark question. We are always going to ask a comparative question. Now it's very important that you do the following. You have to mention first, what is text A about? Summarize it in your own words, give me the main idea, the main message. Then, what is text B about? That affords you 2 out of the 4 marks. Mark 3 and 4, you must tell me what is the difference or what is the same about them. And this has all to do with the question I've asked you. If I've asked you to compare the similarities, what are you going to do? Tell me what's the same, yes? If I asked you how are they different, that's exactly what you do. You tell me how they are different. Make sense? So you should all be able to score 4 out of 4 for that question. I'm sure that all of you at this stage can summarize a writing piece, and even if you can't, try your best. Now, I haven't written this down, but I'd like you to do this. Write a little note for yourself and say the following. Do not skip questions. Why? Your gut is almost 100% correct all the time. You might be unsure about an answer. Here's my advice. If you guess, you have a 50% chance of being correct. 50% chance of being correct. Yes? Where if you don't guess and you leave it open, you have a 100% chance of being wrong. So let's work on that. Let's guess if we don't know. Hopefully at this stage you should be able to get there. But if not, that's also okay. Now let's talk about the magic in the paper. Yes, we added some magic there for you. This is a language paper. 40% of the paper is pure language questions. For both home language, even more so for first additional. That means that you should be able to score very high here. So even if you really don't like English, even if you don't do well in English, you can get 40% and pass the subject. Fair enough? That's not our aim, right? We want to aim a little bit higher than that at least. But if that is what your aim is, to just pass English because you need 40 for university, then you do that. Study your language, know it off by heart, so that at least for 40% of the paper, you are able to get there. Right, any questions here about this part? Can I go to the summary? Right, summary. It's slightly different. Yes, sir?
So I wanted to ask, earlier on you said that we should start with the summary, but you also said that we should read the article at the beginning as well.
Yes, so you remember you have 10 minutes reading time before your paper starts. So in that 10 minutes, only read the articles. When you start with question 2. Make sense? So when your time starts, when you can start writing down, you start with question 2. And remember, it doesn't matter in which order you answer the sections, as long as you answer, for example, question 2, finish question 2. Next section, question 1, in order of what we've asked the questions. Make sense? So yes, please read in the beginning before you start writing. But as soon as the paper's time starts, you start with question 2. Right, my advice would be question 2, question 5, question 1. Because then you will have 50 marks in the bank already. Got it? So even if you struggle with the advertisement or the cartoon, which we do find learners struggle with, you have already covered more than 2/3 of the paper. I think. I'm an English teacher, I'm guessing. Right. Let's go to summary. It's slightly different for home language and first additional. Very slightly. The only difference is, in first additional, you are going to write bullet form, exactly the same style as what you would do for home language. Home language, the only difference is those 7 bullets you're going to write in a paragraph. So the sentences are going to follow onto each other. So make a note, if you haven't done this previously, you have to do it for your final exam. Right, on top of that, we are going to ask 2 things possibly. Either facts or instructions. Just look at what we're asking. If I'm asking, for example, that you write down facts, it's going to sound something like this. Say, for example, we're doing an article about sunscreen and how great it is to wear when the sun is hot. Now, when I do a fact, it will sound something like this. Sunscreen, or the sun is the hottest between 12 and 3 each day. It's a fact, right? But when I'm doing an instruction, and it's about sunblock, for example, I can say, you must wear sunscreen between 12 and 3 during the hottest time of the day. Okay. So please ensure that you know the difference. A little hint I'd like to give you, write this down. If it is an instruction that you're giving, like your friend is looking after your pet for the holiday, you've seen that one before? Then use the following words in every single sentence. Start this way. You must. You must, and add the rest. You must feed my dog at 7. You must, blah, blah, blah. Those are instructions, and you can use that for the beginning of every sentence. Now, when we look at summaries, it's very, very important, as I said, that you write them as fast as possible in your own words. But if you're running out of time or you're a little bit stressed, use the sentence as we've given it, swap the words around as fast as possible without screwing with the sentence structure, or replace them with synonyms. Then you have used your own words and we will afford you the mark, as long as it's not 4 words in a row that come directly from the text. Got it? I haven't written that down, so you must make a note of it somewhere, please. Yes?
If you write, if you do plagiarism, like you copy all the points, but then they are according to the memo, you still get the 7 marks, even if it's the right point.
Yes? So that's the magic, right? The whole point is that even if you quote everything from the text, and it's correct, you get 7 out of 10. You lose all your language marks, of course. But if you change 1 word in that sequence, or try at least 2 words, I don't know, change the to a, then at least you can get 1 language mark, and that gives you 8 out of 10. But the thing is, you don't struggle necessarily with that. What you do struggle with is identifying the main parts. So it's very important, and maybe this is a skill as a grown-up you can learn at some stage, is when someone speaks to you, listen really carefully, and then in your head, summarize what the main thing is that they're asking you. So especially when someone's complaining to you, listen very carefully, and then repeat it back to them. So you feel, and then repeat it, and see if you could summarize their words. Right? And you can practice that even on WhatsApp. Yes?
With the 3 language marks, say for instance you have your 7 points, but they were wrong, all 7 of them, but you've written them in your own words.
0.
Oh.
Okay, so let me quickly explain how the rubrics works. So the 7 marks, it's negative marking, unfortunately. You all start with 10. Right, and then we start deducting marks. If you have 7 or 6 out of the 7 facts, you get 3 marks for language if you haven't plagiarized. Right. If you get 5 or 4 of the facts correct, you get 2 language marks if you haven't plagiarized. 3 and below, you get 1 language mark. If you have 0 of the content correct, you get 0 language marks. Because what are we marking then? Right, it's not a creative writing piece. The language goes with the points that you have. Make sense? Right, and I haven't given you the memos, but these memos are available for each of these papers that I've given you. So please ensure that if you're uncertain, the rubric, for example, is on there, or the marking criteria for the summary. So if you're unsure, go have a look. But the aim is, as you've said, get 7, and there is 7 out of 10 for you. Right, it's better than 0 out of 10, yes?
Yes.
So let's start there. All right, as I've said, you need to ensure that you recognize the facts. And please highlight the one I've underlined for you. You cannot use general knowledge here. I find even in our prelim papers that we've marked now, that our learners have use their own knowledge that they have on the topic and try to summarize that way. You can't add your own words. I'm not adding you to add. I'm not asking you to add. I'm asking you to summarize. So follow the instruction. I think that's very important in this summary piece here. Right, let's go to visual literacy. Any questions before I move on to visual literacy? Summary questions? Summary should be the easiest thing you do in the paper, ladies and gents. Right, visual literacy, advertising. Advertising seems to be one of the more difficult questions, and it's all about who is the target audience that becomes the problem. Now, very important, I'm going to say this again, you have to be able to tell me, does the image and the text, the words that I've written down, do they function well to advertise my product? There are 3 things that I can advertise, and we find the last 3 years we haven't used a product. We've used an ideal that someone is portraying. So there are 3 things, write them down. I can advertise a product, I can advertise a service, or I can make you aware of something. And it's very important that you know that there are 3 different types of adverts that we use. Why? Because you need to be able to tell me who is this aimed at. It will be your final question that I ask in your paper in this section. So if it's not a product, what am I identifying? You must tell me what the ideal is here. Say for example, we're talking about smoking kills. Sorry for any smokers here, but smoking kills. That's an ideal, a concept that they are selling us. And they will use an image where we'd have half a lung or struggling to breathe or whatever's the case. And they're trying to use a scare tactic or any of the other relevant tactics that they will use. Right, there is a term called AIDA, A-I-D-A. AIDA is very important. It is the techniques that we've used to grab your attention. One of the most important thing is, and write the word down please, look at the focus of the advert. What is the focal point? Is it the words that stand out? Is it the image that stands out? And once you've identified that, you must tell me, why is this thing important? Why have I placed this image in the middle? Because it focuses my attention, and you write it just like that. It focuses my attention to the product, ideal, concept, picture, word, whatever is the focus on. And then tell me, why have I done that? So the important thing that I've told my learners as well is that, ladies and gents, I find that you want to jump to the very elaborate explanation, but you never actually tell me the basic thing. So write this down. What do you see? What do you see? If you see that there is a ball going through a hoop, you write that down, right? Because I'm going to ask you. And we love using this word. Is the advert effective? You've all seen that one before, right? Now, what does effective mean? It means, does it function? Does it work? Does it do its job? And once you're able to answer that, the answer is yes or no. Do you agree? It's yes or no, and then you tell me, why does it work? Why does it not work? Another thing I'd like you to write down just for yourself to remember, please don't use your own opinion here. I'm really sorry to tell you, even if I ask you, in your opinion, I'm not wanting your opinion. What I do need is your academic opinion on the matter, please. So please, when I've asked you, in your opinion, is this a successful article, successful advert? Most likely the answer is yes. Okay, 99.9% of the time, the answer will be yes. And please, think about how we would answer the question. Obviously, we include your answers when we have a brilliant answer, because some of you are magical, or most of you, and then we add to our memo. But once that memo has been decided on a national level, we cannot change it from there. So always ask in context, answer in context, with the information at hand. That means what I see in front of me, that's what I answer on. If you believe in unicorns, fantastic, don't put it in my paper. Okay? Use what is in front of you. Right, you need to know image, logo, slogan, and so forth. The other one I want you to highlight on your paper is the target audience or target market. We alternate between those two. Write there for yourself. The target audience or target market is always the person that will buy the product. So if it is a kiddies product and they've used a child in the advert, guess what? That child is not going to buy, right? Because they don't make a salary, they can't buy anything, they're poor. Guess who buys it? The parent who gets nagged at by the kid because they've seen this advert. So you will write, the target audience is a parent with a young child that will be interested in the product. So for target audience, write there, be very specific. If it's a cologne or an aftershave that's being sold, you realize that there can be two target audience here. Either the men that use the product, that would want to appear in a certain manner, maybe manly, or I don't know, Axe had the whole thing where people followed him around, right? Or it could be the people that would like their man to smell a certain way, right? They can also be the target audience. So please ensure that you always think about who could possibly buy this for this person, or who would need to buy this for themselves. Got it? Okay, can I move on from there? Any questions? There will be 5 questions in this section, 10 marks. Right, at the most 5 questions. Let's go to visual literacy. Second part here is our cartoon. Once again, it's very important, even more so in our cartoon, that you look at the images, and we've called them frames here. You need to look at each frame differently. I am going to ask you, how does this character, how does Garfield's facial expression change from here to the next part? You must be able to tell me, he pulls his face and he looks distraught, or he looks unhappy. Whatever you can identify, write that down. And then for the second and third mark, tell me how that has changed. Right, write that down because it's a very important question, especially in home language. In first additional, we will break that question up into 2 questions. Right, so you won't have a full question of 2 or 3 marks, you'll have 1 or 2 marks in this section. But for home language, you must be able to dissect the part by using not only the words, but please highlight punctuation is very important, because punctuation expresses the emotion in this piece. And if I can identify the emotion, I can identify how someone is feeling. We don't always know how someone is feeling when they raise their eyebrow, but we might be able to pick it up through the choice of words. And some of you are pulling your faces, I know exactly how you feel, right? Because this is part of what we study as language speakers. Right, if someone is leaning like this, it pretty much tells us how they're feeling, right? Or someone is like this currently to me, right, probably knows more than me, so that's how they're feeling at the moment, right? So please ensure that you go through your facial expressions, body language, all the jargon that you need for this piece, like sarcasm, your idiomatic expressions, and very important for both my advertisements and my cartoons, write down stereotyping. We will be using stereotyping. We will make it the dumb blonde. Not that they are, that's why it's a stereotype, right? Are you with me? We will use generalization. Now, we are very technical when it comes to this question. What is the difference between stereotyping and generalization? Stereotyping is a specific, here are the sibilants there, stereotyping, specific group of people. Generalization is a grander or a larger group of people. So if I talk about the difference between men and women, it will be generalization. But when I say, for example, blondes don't know how to do math, I don't know, then it becomes a stereotype. And you must be able to use those words correctly and identify them correctly, please. We will always ask, how is humor created? Always. it will be a question you get. And there's only a few ways we can do that. Overthrow of expectations, like you expect one thing and then there's an anticlimax. We will either ask sarcasm, irony, pun, ambiguity, or stereotyping. That's it. That's how we create humor. And you must study that. You must know how to identify them. And remember, it can be more than one thing. So say for example, it's sarcasm, but it's also ambiguity. We accept both those answers. So write enough there. We find that in question 4 and 5, that learners don't write enough. So where we could have gone and looked for a mark for you, you've written one line for a 3-mark answer. You need to write enough, ladies and gents. Right, any questions there? A word that you're unsure about? Yes?
So when you ask how is humor created, you first start by identifying is it sarcasm, and then explain the sarcasm.
Definitely. You must tell me, Garfield, we expect Garfield to eat all the lasagna. And when he doesn't, it becomes ironic because blah, blah, blah. Right, so work it into your answer. If you just want to write sarcasm is used, we will afford you that mark, and then you can explain as well. I personally like to write it into my answer because it's part of my explanation. Right, but if your brain works that way, we accept your answer. Okay. Good. Any other questions here? Once again, 4 to 5 questions here, 10 marks. For first additional, we will have more questions here, and they will be broken up into 1 question marks. And guess what? You get to have another language question here. Yay! Right, last one. We call this editing, but it's basically language. We are going to make an accidental, on purpose mistake in your reading piece, and you're going to be there to identify it. Now, what mistakes do we make? We either make a punctuation mistake, right? So if I ask you, correct the single error in paragraph so-and-so. This is what you could possibly get there. Either punctuation error, sentence structure, so something is wrong with the sentence and I've ended with a verb where I shouldn't have, or I've forgotten a capital letter somewhere, that's also part of your punctuation, or I've used the incorrect concord. Now just a reminder of what is concord, it's not the plain. Concord is when my verb and my noun do not agree with each other. So you can't say, I are going to the park. No, it doesn't sound like it. You need to use the correct noun with the correct verb. And your job is going to identify that. We don't make it easy because it is language after all, but here's a hint from me to you. When we've used single verbs, we most likely add an S to that verb. Okay? So if you want to know if the noun agrees with the verb, look at that. We are going to either add a verb, S, or leave out the S from the verb. And that's going to show you the concord there. On top of this, we are going to ask active and passive voice. It's where you have to swap your subject and your object around in the sentence, and you must be able to correct it and be able to identify it. We are going to make spelling errors, so please know your spelling. Right, if this is not your home language, ensure that you go through the basic 124 rules. No, I'm joking. You just have to do at least the basic ones. Do we double up vowels or consonants? And how do we create plurals? Now, a very easy way to remember is, ladies and gents, write this down, please. We do not use apostrophes to create plurals in English. For example, if I write the word DVD, I do not use an apostrophe and an S for a plural. It will be DVDs, DVDs. Got it? Apostrophes have 2 functions. What are they? Possession, omission, or contraction. You must know how to identify them and correct them. Write that down. Identify them and correct them. It's super important that we are able to do that. Here's a hint from me to you when you are correcting this. When it comes to apostrophes, first write the word, whether that is a single word or a plural word, then add the S. Write down the following. Pig, write down pig, come on. Then below that, write pigs. Now if it's a single word like pig, I'm going to write apostrophe and then the S. Add it there. When it is a plural word, pigs, I'm going to add the apostrophe and then the S. You just say pig's ears. You don't have to say pig's ears. It still has the same function. Now, the question is, why did she add an apostrophe and an S? Because that is a spelling rule. Okay, we tend to leave that second S off, right? Because, I mean, if it has a plural S, it has to have just an apostrophe. That is only true in two cases. When I have a surname that's a biblical, a name that is biblical, or a name that is classical, like James, and it ends on an S, then it only gets an apostrophe. Or when I have a word like Moses, and it ends on an S, it only gets an apostrophe. Those are the only two exceptions. Got it? The rest get apostrophe S's. No, right? Magical. Right, a misrelated participle. Do we all know what a participle is? Right, it's very important that you know what a participle is. It's part of our verb group. You must be able to tell me that where it goes, is it in the right place? Okay, do you see the second word there that says parenthesis?
Yes.
Right, parenthesis is introduced into a sentence. It's extra information that I put in either 2 brackets, 2 dashes, or 2 commas. And you must know the function. It's to add information to the paragraph. And we're going to ask that function because we love parentheses. Everyone happy? Any questions there? Ladies and gents, this is a straightforward section. You have to actually score at least 8 to 10 out of 10 for this. Because it sits on your bum and study work. No, we can practice this. To carry on with that, comma splice errors. Yes? Do you know, or do you want to know how we identify? She's asked compound, complex, and simple sentences. Right, I'm going to tell you now. I'm going to run through my list and then we'll get back to that. Okay, it's very easy actually. Right, comma splices. Does anyone know what this is? It's when we use a comma to join 2 main clauses. That is an error. Do not do that. How do we join sentences or parts of a sentence? We either use participles or conjunctions. If you've used a comma, say for example I've said, he likes ice cream, she likes waffles, and I've put a comma in between, that is an error. We call it a comma splice. We even have a name for it. So please ensure that you're able to identify this. Why is section C, question 5, so important? Where does it double up in your papers? Come on. Paper 3. Your writing pieces. If you're able to understand question 5's content and apply that to paper 3, your writing pieces, then you're going to win, ladies and gents. So please, it is important that you study the rules. Because comma splices, and you can make a little side note for yourself, is why people do poorly in paper 3. They use comma splices to create sentences. Yes?
2 questions. So you said instead of a comma you need to use a conjunction or?
A participle.
Or participle.
There we go.
In the instance of a comma splice in a paper, you're allowed to replace that comma with a semicolon, no?
If the function is correct, I would advise you to rather put a full stop, start a new sentence, or use a relevant word to join the sentences, because a comma splice leads in an explanation. So when I say he likes ice cream, she likes waffles, does she like waffles explain why he likes ice cream? No, it doesn't, right? And that is why it's very important that you know your function of your punctuations. Because comma splices are used very specifically, not for joining parts of a sentence, but for explaining the first part of the sentence. Okay, so make sure your punctuation you know. Ladies and gents, we are going to ask abbreviations, acronyms, and we're going to ask you to maybe write them out in full. Now write a little side note for yourself. You have to be able to have general knowledge here. You must know what SPCA stands for. ABSA, F&B. You must know that F&B is not an acronym. Why not? Because it doesn't form its own new word. You have to say each letter. It's a simple abbreviation. All right, so please know the difference there. Right, with your parts of speech, and this is for home language specifically, you have to be able to change the parts of speech. So if I've given you a noun and I've asked you to change it to an adjective, you must be able to do that. Right, so please ensure that you know how to do that. And here are some ideas, and this is why I've printed you papers to go through. The basic thing about language is, ladies and gents, we can't really change that much. The only thing that will change is our reading pieces. So if you have the basic understanding of the question papers, of the questions that we're going to ask, then you are going to win in this paper. I've seen an increase between 20 and 30% in learners who never practice a paper and for this exam practiced a paper. Right, yes, we're not going to ask the same comprehension, but the style of the paper will not change. The language questions, we only have so many to use. So even if you've practiced it and we only ask 3 of it, it is 3 marks that you did not have previously. So I'm going to just quickly run through them again. Revisable papers. Be aware of the mark allocation. You'll notice in the paper, just turn to the first page. The mark allocation with the choice of verb that I've used tells you what cognitive level it is. The in your opinions and comparative questions, those are the higher order questions. The rest of them are direct or your inferral. In other words, see what I've said and make a conclusion. Got it? So part 1, 2, level 1, 2, and 3. Right, the rest we've talked about.